Hey CDA, and welcome back to this step-by-step guide to Dyson Sphere Program. This series is intended for players that are relatively new to the game or are simply overwhelmed by the complexity, and this episode in particular might be very useful for you if you are one of those players. Because if there's one thing where people get overwhelmed, it is after you unlock red science. You have about a dozen new resources to make, as many as new buildings you can craft probably, and you unlock the ability to fly to other planets. All of that turns into a mess of spaghetti really fast, not to mention the power issues that come with scaling your factory up. So let me try and offer you an alternative that will allow you to reach yellow science and interstellar logistics without a huge mess of spaghetti and actually without building too much. In order to do that, I am going to assume that you've done all the research that is required just by blue research, so that includes specifically the processors over here. And I recommend that you start working on, of course, your blue and red science, but specifically I suggest that you get a few things in a certain order. So you are going to want to unlock titanium smelting. I also recommend that you unlock the distribution logistics center if you want to make your life a little bit easier. You don't necessarily need it, but if you're going to use these, as I will in a moment, then you're going to need this as well. Then I also recommend that you get the upgrade that will allow you to fly across planets, and that's the mecha sail, so make sure you queue that up. And then basically after that, it doesn't really matter too much what you queue up, but you're going to need all the things that you're going to need in order to get yellow science over here. So that means all the technologies in this area, and you're also going to need, where is it? Crystal smelting, because this is one of the items that actually goes into yellow science. So basically queue all of that up. You're going to have to spend a lot of time researching that anyway. We're going to be building a couple of things. This is going to feel like a bit of a slow part of the game, and that's also why people overbuild, because you're just constantly building stuff, working on your powering and building more, and that's not really what you need to be doing if you want to be efficient about it. Okay, so first things first, I recommend that you build a storage box near the motors over here, as well as the exciters and the prisms over here. And of course, all you need to do is just connect a single sorter to there, just to make sure you are actually making use of those boxes. Now, don't let the boxes be at full capacity as always, just turn them down a little bit. You don't need massive amounts of these items, but you do want a little stockpile to be able to work from. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to clear out this area in the corner over here. It's right next to the inn. It's below your oil, just to give us some building room. Then the next thing we're going to do is actually set up a very simple facility with a set of 6 smelters and with 1 input belt. And then we're actually going to copy that like so, and then we say use now and make that same layout again. It's probably not even the most efficient way to do that, but I just want to show you what we're building. And that's going to be making a little bit of silicon, but in order to make silicon we actually need silicon ore, which we're going to make from stone like this. It's a very inefficient recipe, but for now we don't actually have silicon on our planet, so this is why we're doing it that way. And let's see, then we're going to make the silicon over here in these 2 smelters. And then we're just going to put that into these 2 boxes over here. So this doesn't actually need to be that long. Let's see, this is the output belt over here. So we have that going like so. And then of course we have another belt going like this. So let me hook this up to some stone, put some recipes in here, put some sorters and power, etc., and show you what we have. And there we go, a nice little unit that is producing some silicon ore for us, which we cannot get in a more efficient way from our starting planet. So working like intended, and now, hey, there we go, we also have the logistics unlocked that we will make use of in a moment. Now the next thing I always like building is a little layout like this. So 4 of these boxes, which are basically input boxes, and then 2 assemblers to make whatever we need them to make, and then 2 output boxes that, well, basically stock up whatever we are making in these assemblers. So for example, you can make a layout that makes motors and the one that makes turbines, because these share a lot of the same items that they require. So for example, motors need iron gears and these magnetic coils, of course, and then we have the turbines that need the same magnetic coils as well as the motors themselves. So you can basically start making motors over here, and then whenever you have some surplus motors, you can put them in this box, and then you can also make some turbines. Now there's a couple of ways to do that. So you can manually put those items in these boxes, and as long as you remember what goes where, that's not a problem, but you can make that a little bit more efficient. And you do that by making yourself some logistic bots as well as these logistic distributors. Now, in order to make those, you're going to need processors along with a lot of materials that you already have. And the processors need that silicon, so that is why we just built that. Now, you're not going to want to make massive amounts of these, so I recommend that you limit yourself to making 2 of these at the same time, and then only making perhaps maybe 2 of these assembling bots. That's actually plenty. And then just alternate those like that, as long as you have the actual materials to do so. There's no really any reason to do this any other way, because typically what you want these logistics centers to do is actually basically connect up 2 storage boxes. And if you just have 2 logistic bots flying up and down initially, that will be more than enough. Okay, so how do you actually use these things? Well, first of all, you place one of the distributors on top of a storage unit, and then you set this to a certain type of materials. For example, I want the electric motors to actually go in here. You can leave this provide and collect for Icarus by default just enabled. In case you ever want to draw this to your inventory, you can, but this one is the most important. So provide to other distributors. Now in this case, actually, I don't want it to provide anything. I want it to gather. So I need to set it to the request from other distributors mode. This is not actually going to do anything unless I put some logistic bots in here, but actually I recommend only putting logistic bots in the distributors that are actually going to be distributing something. Otherwise you have bots flying in 2 directions. That speeds up the process, but initially this is actually going to be pretty power consuming, so that's not necessarily what we want. I'm actually going to put this down to the minimum as well, just to make sure we're not drawing too much power from our system. Now, of course, in order for that system to actually work, we need another distributor over here, and this is going to be actually supplying, so the setting is correct. Setting the power to minimum again, and then just put 2 logistic bots in here, and there they go. The little spinning discs are flying out with a couple of electric motors all the way over to our facility over here, where they are now going to be supplying us with motors. All we need to do is repeat this for the electric coils. And ta-da, we now have a mini facility over here that's fully automated and is actually producing us some turbines. This is going to be producing it at a terrible rate, but that's actually not a problem because we currently have no need for a lot of turbines, but we are going to need a fair amount of them pretty soon. So this is just in order to prepare us for the next few steps. Now, similarly, if you feel like this is draining your power too much, you can actually just walk back and forth and just put in 500 or 600 of these at the same time, just by making a short trip to where we actually have these stored up, and that will actually work for a very long time and not draw on your power as much. So that's a very valid way of doing this. It's just manual, so it won't keep going forever, but that's completely up to you whether you want this completely automated or just walk back and forth a few times with those materials. You know what the fun thing is, you can use the exact same layout to make yourself some components and processors. You're just going to need a bunch of different materials. So the components themselves, they need silicon and copper. Well, you should have plenty of copper by now. And in order to make processors out of them, you're going to need those components as well as circuit boards. So similarly, you have a pretty much identical layout to the whole engine setup. Now, you don't necessarily need to worry about the engines initially because you are getting them from your mall, but you do need to actually supply all the resources for the components. And again, if you want to save yourself some power, you can put them in manually. If you want to automate them, I recommend using these distributors, but only put in about 2 logistic bots initially in each supplying distributor. So here you can see it at work. We actually repurposed all those little storage units that we had in our initial jumpstart base, and they're now supplying us with the resources we need to make the more complicated stuff without overbuilding it and making whole like layouts for that and doing everything over and duplicating that. Nope, we're just using the little buffers that we already had, because remember we had several hundreds of these already in storage, so might as well use them, right? Okay, now we have that sorted, let's take another look at the yellow research. So we are going to need these diamonds as well as titanium crystals. The titanium crystals are right before that, and you need organic crystals and titanium in order to make those. The diamonds themselves are very straightforward. Let's see, they are over here. You simply make them from graphene, so we already have that, or sorry, graphite, I should say. We already have that, so that's pretty straightforward, but the titanium crystals are usually where people get a little bit confused. So, in order to make those, we are going to need titanium. We don't have that, but we do have all the materials that we need in order to make those organic crystals. So, let's get to work on that. In order to make organic crystals, we're going to need oil. We have that. We're going to need water. We can pump that. And we're going to need plastic. We don't necessarily have that yet, but we can easily make that because, again, we only need some oil and graphene for that. I keep saying graphene, I mean graphite, because those are two different things. This is graphite and this is graphene, which we're also going to make in a moment. But for now, let's focus on getting the yellow signs up and running. And similar to how we made these layouts, I'm actually going to do something very similar for these recipes. So we can just put in a few boxes. We also are going to need some power, so I kind of like putting a power pole over there. And then we're going to need some of these chemical plants. And while I'm making some of these logistic distributors in the background, let's look at the chemical plant. That has 4 entry points on each side, so that's quite a lot. And we can just place one down like so, and this is going to allow us to make plastic. Now in order to make plastic, we're going to need oil and graphite, like I said, and then we can just copy this, leave a little bit of room in between for a storage box, just in case we want to draw off some of that additional plastic. And then this one is going to be making organic crystals. Now we need the same inputs almost. We need some plastic, which is coming out of the chemical plant to the left, and we're going to need the oil. We already have that here, but we're just going to need to bring in some water. So that's what the third box is for. Now all we need to do is connect this up, add some storage boxes, maybe some distributors, and then we're good to go. And there we go, a nice little layout to make plastic and organic crystals. And of course we are going to have to bring in the graphite as well as the oil. I also put in a box for the water, but honestly I just recommend bringing the water from right over here because, well, that just saves us a lot of power from the logistic bots. Now, just in case you weren't aware, you can actually put splitters like this, for example, like over here, and then put a storage box on top of that, and then put a distributor on top of that. And then what you can actually do is make a belt like this, for example, like this, and then in here like this, and in here like this. And now we have all our oil connected to a nice little storage box over here that will gather that oil and then distribute it, assuming we of course set it to the correct way to do that, to the places where we need it to go. Let me see, do I actually have some logistic bots? Yes, I do. And again, just 2 will do for now, and put those in. There we go. You do need to make sure that it's actually powered up, which mine currently is not, as you can see. So, like this. And then we should have our little bots flying off. There we go. And supplying us with some oil. And there we go. So I've just put distributors on all the materials that we already had, built some pumps over here to supply the water, and it's now all working according to plan. And if you haven't been in the game for a little while, these chemical plants now look amazing. I mean, just look at that swirling going on there. You can actually see the inputs going through these little pipes. There's all kinds of little details in here that weren't there before, so they're now awesome looking items. We're going to make a very similar layout to this again, but now we are going to make some acid. And not only are we going to make some acid, we are also going to be making graphene over here. So as you can see, we now have a nice little yellow swirly ball on top of the ones that we already had, and a nice little blue one as well. It's turning into a colorful theme over here, but the layout is exactly the same as we had before, with the exception of an additional distributor over here, which I'm not actually using, but I just included it in the blueprint that I will share with you as well, just in case I ever want to build this somewhere else where I actually don't have access to stone. But since we have stone right next door, all I did was add a splitter over here, bring in the stone naturally, and add in the splitter over here, and basically make sure we have all the water that we need as well. I'm actually bringing it into the storage unit just so I can easily see what's actually in here. But you can do that in whatever way you want. It's a pretty simple layout once again, but we should now have a steady flow of graphene coming in as well. And then to round things up, I like having another set of these chemical labs making just acid. And yes, I know that including a storage tank in here somewhere would probably be more efficient, and if that's what you want to do, then you can do so. I just leave this storage open and you will have a couple of hundreds of these acid units in here, but a storage tank would be able to store up a lot more, so feel free to connect one up if you feel that is necessary. Now, there is one thing that you need to take note of, and that is this is actually the second or even third node that is going to be using oil. And because initially I said we were only going to supply the bots to the supplying depot, it's actually up to that depot over there, all the way in the top, to determine, is the oil going here, is the oil going here, or is the oil going here. So it actually has 3 options to pick from, and as a result of that, what you can get is that the bots will be traveling back and forth between the same station over and over. Now, in order to deal with that, you should now actually start switching to putting the bots in the requesting station instead. That way you are always sure that this station, for example, has now bots in it. This is always going to get access to oil as long as there is any oil within its range to be gotten. So just to make sure that you don't get your whole system coming to a standstill. Expanding a little further on this theme, we now have everything we need to start making particle containers. So we have copper, we have graphene, and we have turbines. And it's the same layout. It's a little bit of laziness on my part here that I have 2 assemblers with 2 storage units getting the copper in. But hey, it just looks very nice and organized compared to everything else. And hey, looks matter. We also have, very importantly, both of the resources that we're going to need to actually make yellow science. So we have the diamonds over here that are just being made from the graphite itself. Very straightforward. It's a little bit annoying to me that this is a smelter rather than an assembler, but hey, we'll have to deal with it. And of course we get the titanium crystals. Now, the one problem with the titanium crystals is that we actually need titanium for that, and we don't have that. Well, you could technically gather it on your home planet. The rocks every now and then have titanium in them, and especially these larger rocks, let's see if it actually happens this time around, tend to have some titanium in them. Yep, as you can see, there you go, and you can just craft the titanium yourself. That's what you want to do, and so on. But honestly, this is not the most efficient way to do that. However, if you have any titanium ore left in your inventory from gathering all the stones earlier, might as well just put them in the box and make use out of them, because that will actually, well, pre-prepare some of the items you're going to need for yellow science. But let's make this a little bit more robust, shall we? We are going to take our first trip to the other planet, and in order to do that, make sure you kind of clean up your inventory. All you need to bring is some belts, some sorters, some boxes in order to put stuff in, and some smelters, and as well as some way to power everything up. So wind turbines as well as Tesla towers should be sufficient. You could clear everything else out of your inventory if you want. You don't necessarily need to completely clear it out. Depends on how much you want to bring back with you the first time around. I recommend just cleaning out all these random items that you are carrying around. Have about half your inventory empty, maybe a little bit more than that, and you should be pretty much good to go. It's worth briefly checking out the other planets in your system before you decide where to go to. So we have Delta Pictoris 2 at the moment, which has an amazing amount of wind energy, but it doesn't actually have any silicon. So I think we'll be going to Delta Pictoris 1, which has a little bit of everything. We actually don't have that much silicon in here either, but 1.5 million is going to be more than enough for what we need to do. It doesn't have a particularly good wind energy ratio. It does have very high solar energy, which we can't really make use of just yet. So that's slightly annoying. I would have preferred this to be higher, but this is where we'll go. When you're flying to a different planet, you want to try and keep the bias as low as possible. Basically, if you have that figured out correctly, you should be flying at a angle towards your planet that takes into account the movement of the planet itself and avoid overshooting or undershooting as much as possible. But you'll have to kind of steer in between, and that's basically all you have to keep your eye on. It's pretty straightforward. Make sure that you bring some energy with you, by the way, because you do not want to run out of energy while you're in mid-flight. And yeah, that just gives you nightmares, and just don't do that. Just make sure you always have some energy on you so you can adjust your flight if you need to. Having arrived at our planet, you'll get a milestone popping up as well. We're basically looking for any place that has both titanium and silicon, and we have a nice location over here, so let's jump to there. And once you get to that location, just set up a very simple mining facility like this with some silicon and titanium. You're not really that interested in the silicon. It will fill up pretty fast, but just bring like maybe 3, 4, 5 stacks, whatever you want, but you're mostly interested in bringing as much titanium as you can carry. Now, don't overdo it. You don't have to wait here for an hour to produce a massive amount or anything like that. If you bring back maybe like around 1,000 titanium, something similar to what I have in my inventory right here, you're probably already going to have enough, as long as you're a little bit careful about how much you spend. And well, in worst case scenario, you just fly back to this planet and grab yourself some more. Back on your home planet, I suggest you put around 600 of these titanium bars into the facility that is going to produce the titanium crystals, and not any more than that, because we're not going to use them just for the titanium crystals. We're also going to use them for a couple of other things. So if you overdo how much you dump in here, you're basically going to end up having to go back to the planet again, which we're going to do at some point anyway, but in order to be efficient, we'd rather do it as few times as we possibly can. And this means that we're now all good to go in order to start yellow science. Now, in hindsight, I built this a little bit too close together, so I didn't leave myself much room to expand. And you know me, I like my nice looking layout, so I'm actually going to tear this down and just rebuild it in such a way that we can neatly fit the yellow science in here as well. And there we go. This is completely unnecessary, but this just looks a lot more organized than what it would have looked like otherwise. So it's the same basic idea, just stacked a little higher, because now we can. So we have a total of 18 blue and red signs, and just for good measure I also put 18 yellow signs, although we won't necessarily have enough inputs in order to make use of this at the moment, but hey, working like intended so far. And then all 3 of these types of sciences will combine into single stacks or 2 stacks of research units that are going to process all of this. Now, what you want to do at this point is make sure you start researching 2 specific technologies. We want the high strength titanium alloy, and you can just discontinue whatever else you were researching, assuming you have gotten into the technology tree far enough. And we want Interstellar logistics system that will actually allow us to, well, do exactly as it says on the tin, research the Interstellar logistics station. Now, in order to do that, we actually also need, oh, I was nearly done with that, the reinforced thrusters. And there we go. And the reason I said 600 titanium into the titanium crystals is we need 120 yellow signs for this and 80 here, so that's 200 in total. We need 3 titanium to make 1 titanium crystal, so we need 3 times 200 is 600 titanium in order to make this yellow science, assuming you have nothing from your starting mining of all that stone and stuff like that to begin with. And of course, just to keep everything neat and organized, we are bringing those resources in, the titanium crystals as well as the diamonds, by means of 2 logistics distributors with just a couple of drones in there. Not going to have to be too many drones, because we're not producing anything at a very high rate at the moment, but you get the point. We want to make sure we get some yellow science going. And we're almost there, bear with me for a moment. I used once again the same layout. This time around I am going to remove this one, because we only need 1 assembler making stuff. And we'll add in a little bit of a belt like this. And let's see, we should be able to add, yep, like this over here. And then we are going to be making planetary logistics stations over here. And that's a lot of resource being done there. So we're almost coinciding with our research in terms of finishing our little sprint to yellow science. Or at least automating yellow science, because we haven't quite done that yet. Now this can actually completely go. We won't need this one over here. And of course we want to put in the 4 different inputs for the planetary logistics. Now there we go, I have this all set up. Now it's important that you don't throw in all your remaining titanium. We only need 2 of these to be produced at first before we can bother about anything else. And that's a total of 80 titanium, so 1 stack will do. At this point, you're probably getting close to unlocking the Interstellar logistics system, but in order to actually make those, as you can see, we need a new type of material that we haven't made yet, and that's the titanium alloy. Now, this is made from all kinds of stuff that we have already on hand, so all we need to do is make a little facility, just like everything else we've been doing so far, in order to make a small amount of this. I bet you totally did not see this layout coming. It's like pretty much identical to the one we have over here for the particle containers, but now with 2 smelters and duplicating the acid. Now the reason I have 2 of these is because we actually need quite a bit of this titanium, and this just speeds up the production a little bit, assuming of course actually put in some titanium, and this is where you can pretty much dump everything that you have left. You're going to need a lot of that because we are going to need to make these thrusters. We are going to need to make something we haven't actually unlocked yet, so let me show you in the technology tree. We're going to need to make at least 1 logistics vessel to make sure we can actually transport stuff up and down from our planet. And we are going to need to upgrade 2 of our planetary logistics stations into the Interstellar version. And as you can see, we need quite a bit of titanium in order to do that. What we also need is a way to actually do this, so you can guess it. We make our favorite little layout twice more. So I have one layout here that's first making rockets from turbines and titanium into rockets, and then the rockets are being transformed into logistic vessels with some more titanium as well as processors. Now I do recommend not automating the titanium deployment just yet, because we're only going to need at least 1 of these vessels. Even if you can just produce 1, that is enough to completely automate everything we've been doing so far. So yeah, you can make more, but make sure you make at least 1, and then make sure you make at least 2 of these interstellar logistics stations, and you are going to need a total of 80 titanium in order to do that. And once you have the first 2, then you can pretty much go infinite, so just make sure you get those first 2 done. Now let's grab our 2 stations as well as 2 of those logistics vessels, just 2 because why not, and let's go place down our automation. Let's make a little bit of room over here. We're already low on power, so we might as well go down even further. These things are huge, as you can see, but they're also hugely important. So the way these work, you first want to set this one up in your home planet. You assign a slot, so for example I want titanium ingots and silicon ingots over here. I want them to locally supply them but remotely demand it. So this means it will bring it in from other planets, but on this planet it will actually supply it, and that's exactly what we want because we are producing it elsewhere, but we want to use it on this planet. Of course I do need to put in some vessels, so now there's 2 vessels in here. I recommend just setting the charging power very low. Everything else is pretty much good to go as it stands right now. You do typically want to up the minimum load of the drones just so they are not flying around with just a few items in their pocket, but yeah, that's just me. It won't matter for now because all now we need to do is connect this to a few boxes. Like so. Don't forget to set the sorters on the in and outputs, just so we have one box for the silicon and 1 box for the titanium. And of course add in a few boxes as well as logistic bots, and you're almost done. Now all we need to do is take back another trip to the planet we just visited, build another ILS on the other planet, set it of course to also supply the silicon and the titanium, so make sure it says remote supply over here, and you will probably see your entire factory coming to a standstill over here. Why is that? These things are so extremely power hungry that initially it will draw all the little power you have on this planet until it's actually fully powered. You can reduce that a little bit by turning this maximum charging power down, because this thing does not actually need to be charged. And then of course it will charge slower, and as soon as it's completely charged it will actually not draw any more energy. Now you might be wondering why you don't actually see any vessels in transport yet. That's because the vessels are set to 100% load, so they will need at least 200, I believe. Yeah, initially it's 200, so there need to be at least 200 titanium and silicon for this to actually do anything. However, you can speed that process up by just dumping a whole lot in here. And then you should see, there we go, 2 vessels incoming to pick this up. Now, of course, we do need to make sure that we turn off these little storage units, because they no longer serve a function. So we can simply remove them and take all the items that are in there, either with us or just put them in here and let the transport do the work for us. And there we go, we have our spaceships coming in with our titanium. The titanium is going straight into this box. The space shuttles are again off to get some more silicon and titanium this time around. The AI does spread it around quite nicely, so that's convenient. And as this box is filling up, you can see some drone activity is starting to happen, because we are now going to be producing more titanium alloy. We're going to be producing some basics for the yellow science. We are going to be producing some more ILSs and PLSs, and basically good things are going to happen, and everything is fully automated. And there you have it, everything you need to progress all the way to yellow science, as well as make sure your interstellar logistics is up and running, and it all fits in this screen. Well, aside from the part that's on the other planet, but you get what I mean. I mean, this is completely spaghetti free. It's actually very straightforward to build. And honestly, if you try to scale this up sooner, it probably will only take you more time rather than less time. And you will probably have to redo everything that you built anyway, because you are starting to scale up from this point onward, because now we have the ILSs unlocked. Basically the entire game opens up to us. We can go anywhere, at least in our own system. We can make much larger builds. We have access to more advanced buildings, and so on and so on. That will be all in the next few episodes on how to progress and transition to properly using ILSs in the next few episodes. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this. This is definitely a very efficient way to get to yellow science. If you liked it, let me know in the comments. I actually really like this use of the logistics bots. I know a lot of people weren't that that's overwhelmed by them when they first came out. They were like, what use are they? Well, I think this is a pretty good use for them. There's more uses actually, and I'll get to that in the next episode as well. But for now, I think this was a lot of content, about 30 minutes for how many different items did we produce from scratch in this episode? I don't know, I lost count somewhere. So, hope you enjoyed this. If you're still here, you're awesome. And I hope to catch you in the next one.